So I'd like to introduce Curt to everybody here. He's sitting out in near Palo Alto with a wonderful view of the forest behind him. So Curt was president and CEO of SRI International in Silicon Valley from 1998 to 2014. During this time, SRI's revenue tripled and SRI became recognized as one of the world's most productive innovation enterprises, having helped create things like Siri, HDTV, intuitive surgical, and many other world-changing innovations. His teams have won 2 Emmys. You can see one over his shoulder there. And he and he was on the Innovation Council for President Obama and a similar function in Singapore. He started his career at RCA and then GE before joining SRI. He also formed a management consulting group, The Practice of Innovation, to share with companies, governments, and universities what he's learned about innovation, education, and economic development. I'm a little biased. Curt is a WPI grad and a WPI trustee now, and a professor at both WPI and Northeastern. So welcome, Curt. And I just wanted to start by asking, tell us a little bit more about your background and the connection to New England here.
Well, I grew up in Cranston, Rhode Island. Cranston, I can actually say it pronounced. I can pronounce the words correctly, I can do that. So welcome to all my New England friends. I grew up there, and the big thing that happened in my life is I played the violin professionally in the Rhode Island Philharmonic when I was a kid. And that changed my life, and I came to WPI, and that changed my life again. And then I joined RCA and then GE. And then we were bought by SRI International. And that was really a big change, because in big companies, they don't teach you how to be value creators. And at SRI, we had to be value creators because that's what we did. We create products and services for companies around the world. And it was a painful thing to learn, I'll tell you. It was painful. But we eventually figured it out, and we created a methodology that we now teach around the world. And at SRI, we would, starting in bankruptcy, the place was bankrupt when I became CEO, had 0 money, the buildings were falling down, they were selling off the land, and everybody hated each other. And just by changing the way we worked, we grew 3.5 times, and we were systematically creating another multi-billion-dollar business every 3 or 4 years. Same people, had no money to change anybody. There was no such thing as cleaning house. The house was the house. And like in most companies, the problem was not the people, it was the management. We're using methods that just couldn't work anymore in today's world. So that's me.
So let's start with a question about the concept that are often confused. What is value creation, and how does it differ from invention and innovation?
Yeah, it's amazing. I deal with CEOs and senior executives all the time, and I start off by asking them definitions for certain words. So invention is, you can get a patent for that. Todd, that only about 3% of patents are actually used. It's an enormous source of waste when you think about all the patents. So it's something clever, it's something new, you can build it, it doesn't violate the law. That's invention. Value creation is the process of putting all the pieces together to create innovations. So all the pieces means including a business model, de-risking. We were talking about some of that before we opened up here. And innovation is when it gets into the marketplace with a sustainable business model, so at least sustainable for a while. And what's amazing to me is I've asked thousands of senior executives the definition for innovation, and so far only 2 have mentioned the business model. Now, they all know it needs to have a business model, but I think what that's interesting is it's not in the front of their mind. And as you know today, business model innovation is one of the most important things we can go after. So invention, value creation, and innovation, 3 different steps. And they all have to be there if you want to be successful. And you need to know what each is supposed to do and how to do it.
And so with only 3% of the patents being used, you're scaring me because I have a lot of patents at WPI.
You don't want them if you don't use them, Todd. Get rid of them. Get rid of them.
We did, when I got there, we had 300 active patents, and overnight, I cut it in half, and
Good man.
about 40-50% of our patents are being used. So that we're trying
There you
to.
go. Good
Well,
man.
that's because you're teaching there, and you made me change my invention disclosure form.
Well, if a patent doesn't have value in the marketplace, again, it's an invention, but it's a waste.
Right. So you have, tell us about the NABC, because those are the first four questions in our invention disclosure form.
Well, so when we work around the world, I look for three things that people are doing. One is are they working on important opportunities, important unmet opportunities, and do they know how to identify them? That's number one. Number two, do they have a common language so they can talk to each other? So we just mentioned, three kind of key ideas: invention, value creation, and innovation. But in our world, one of the most important is the definition for the value proposition. And we tried all kinds of different definitions, and we finally boiled it down to four fundamental questions. What's the important unmet need? N. What's the approach for the offering and the business model? What's the approach? What are the benefits per cost? Benefits per cost is the definition of customer value. So B, and how does that compare to the competition and the alternatives? So four questions: need, approach, benefits per cost, and competition. So in our world, that's where we start. We start with the most basic questions first, and then we build up until we get to a new business model or a venture or a license or whatever it is. Many people start with, they go to entrepreneur classes and they think they're going to start there and then work backwards somehow. That doesn't work. And it's one reason why we see so much failure and why a lot of those programs don't work. You start out first with the value creation part of it, the invention, the value creation part, and put all the pieces together. And those four questions, NABC, are it. Just one quick thing. Those four questions set the direction for where you're going. And oftentimes I hear people proudly saying how they pivoted when they formed their venture. And I'm thinking, boy, that was awful. If you're pivoting, that means you weren't going in the right direction when you started. Now, we all understand that you're going to have to zig and zag, but oftentimes the kind of zigs and zags we see people make because they didn't do their homework when they got started is just a complete travesty.
So I have to ask this, because in our prior discussion, you were talking about how the value creation work that you're doing at WPI and Northeastern will hopefully create a better patent application for me. Can you explain that?
Well, so the people on this meeting tonight understand that almost all tech transfer programs fail in universities around the United States. The exception is typically if they have a drug, because you don't have to incubate a drug, you just license it to a big pharma company. So that's how Stanford is. Stanford basically has three things that make them successful: 2 drugs and Google. That's basically it. Because they didn't have to incubate those ideas. The thing that's missing almost always in tech transfer programs is a really good incubation process. So why are we the farm team for Todd? Well, we're teaching these fundamental ideas to the faculty at Worcester Poly. Express your value proposition. So we've done this now with, oh my gosh, probably thousands of teams. I mean, it's uncountable because I've been doing this for so long. So far, not one team has ever been able to answer those 4 questions at first in a compelling, quantitative way. Not in any company you've ever heard of, top 10 companies, brilliant people, working on things for 3 or 4 years, and we say, hey, answer these 4 questions. What's the need, the unmet need? Quantify it, make it specific. Tell us what the approach is for the offering and the business model. What are the benefits per cost? And why is that 2 or 10 times better than what other people are doing? They can't do that. So at WPI, for you, Todd, I'm your farm team guy. I'm kind of the junior league for you.
The Woo Sox. The Woo Sox.
We're getting the faculty to stand up every couple weeks and present the value proposition for the research they're doing. And like everybody else that we've ever worked with, they struggle to do that. But once they can answer those 4 questions, they're in a much better position to move forward. They're in a much better position to win new grants. Because the whole idea is to come up with a compelling value proposition for their proposals to go to NSF or DARPA or whoever they go to. So we're doing that. And the end result of that is when they end up in your shop, what we're planning on doing, like we did at SRI, it's the same thing we did at SRI. The research will be better, it'll be higher impact, and it'll be the professors will be better adapted to understand what you're trying to do, in the fact that you need to go to people with your portfolio with a value proposition. You don't go to them with a patent. Nobody wants a patent. What they want is a value proposition. By the way, and that's why tech transfer is such a terrible name. Who wants tech transfer? Nobody wants tech transfer. What they want is value transfer. So we should name these things what they really should be, so we know what we're doing. We're creating value for others that they can appreciate, because we're going to do such a beautiful job of telling them why it matters.
So I'm the Office of Technology Commercialization. Is that okay, or do I have to change that?
I would change it myself, but that's me.
I knew I was going to get beat up in this conversation.
But for sure, if you say tech transfer, stop doing that. Stop doing that.
We don't use that term. So
that's it. Good man.
So I find it interesting how you're working with faculty, because this is kind of a new concept, is this using your approach in your grant applications. And
Correct.
WPI is relatively small. We're very small compared to others, but we went from 25 million to 50 million in sponsored research in just a couple of years, so kind of since you've been there. So how are you working with the faculty to do that?
Well, so again, we focus on the fundamentals first. I mean, our methodology will take you up to a venture or anything else you want to do. That's what we did at SRI. We used, this method was how we started with the research people we had. But then we would, incubate different opportunities, licenses and ventures. And we were forming 2 or 3 new ventures every year, we were doing about $550 million of research. So we were, 10 times bigger than WPI. But nevertheless, the principles are all the same. It starts out with doing great research and with people who begin to understand the fundamentals of how you do that, how you work in teams, that kind of stuff. We taught all that stuff. So over time, they get better and they do better and they win grants faster. So the reason we're starting with the faculty that way is because what they're interested in is their research. That's if you have 100 professors, almost all of them, well, they're all focused on research. So you have to help them be better at that. And research is a form of value creation, after all. It's what it is. And so can you improve that? And the answer is you can improve that a lot. Then, of course, some of them will want to become innovators, let's say 1 out of 10. But we've also helped them position themselves so they can do a better job. And out of 100 people, maybe 1 professor wants to become an entrepreneur. It's pretty rare. So our whole attitude is don't start with the entrepreneurial stuff, because most of the professors aren't interested in that. Start with the thing that is fundamental to their career, help them do a better job at that, help them to become innovators. And then, every once in a while, one of them will want to become an entrepreneur and leave the school to go do it. I would say the thing that has changed the game completely is the fact that we're now all on Zoom. Before, when we would do this in universities, it was really hard. Professors, they have a desperately hard job and they don't have time. They don't have free time. And so if in our process, what we do is we teach them value creation. It can vary from 4 hours to 4 hours, 3 times or 4 times. It depends on how much they want. But let's say we do a workshop for 4 hours to give them the fundamental ideas. And then we have them come back every 2 weeks for an hour, and they continue the incubation process of their proposals. And it's the continuous nature of this, which is how they learn. You don't learn by going to a lecture or listening to someone speak, or you have to do it, you have to do it, you have to do it. So now that we're on the line, it's so much more efficient for the professor. They don't even have to go across campus. And for some of these programs, they're, with universities around the United States or the world. So how do you get together? You can't get together, by traveling. So we stick to the fundamentals. We start with the things that are concerned to the professors first, and then we can, tease out the ones who want to do more. And the fact that we can now get together for just an hour every 2 weeks is transformative. It's the doing and the doing that it's like, playing a musical instrument. If you don't practice it over and over and over again, you're not going to get to Carnegie Hall. And if you're trying to be an innovator, you want to go to Carnegie Hall.
Yeah, I find it fascinating to do this approach on the grant process, because I've been around a long time. Investigators don't think that way, and
they don't. So no, they don't, Todd, until they see that they can be more successful. They can put together more successful grants. They can put together bigger grants. They can go after center grants, and then it's more efficient and effective. Nobody's smart enough today to answer these questions quickly alone. It just doesn't work. You can't do it. Everything we did at SRI started with small teams with almost no money. Our whole goal was, when I went to SRI, it was bankrupt. We had no money. All we had was the ability to get people to work in a more productive way. And by doing that, we created hundreds of billions of dollars of new economic value with the same people who'd been failing for 20 years. And by the way, submitting grants to the government.
I think you may have answered this, but one of our participants sent in, how do we change the old school tech transfer offices so that promising value-added creations have a better chance on goal? I think that's what you just have been going through, right?
Well, it is. So you need to have an incubation process. So you just can't lob your IP over to Todd and expect him to all of a sudden magically come up with a value proposition for it. So the rule is, again, IP without a value proposition is basically useless. It has no value. Someone has to put together a value proposition. So Todd just mentioned something that I should have picked up a moment ago. Todd changed the patent disclosure process to match up with the NABC value proposition. So everybody now who goes to Todd realizes they need to have the beginnings of a value proposition for him to make it possible for him to evaluate the disclosure first, but also then to evaluate whether he might be able to turn it into a patent. Because again, Todd does not want IP. He wants valuable IP.
Yeah, and believe me, there's varying degrees of completeness when I get those NABCs. I can tell the one through your workshop.
I know. It's pretty dramatic, actually. It's kind of magical when you're sitting there with people after they've come back 3 or 4 times to see the improvement that they've made. These are not terribly, this is not quantum mechanics. Some of you majored in physics. I majored in physics. This is not quantum mechanics. The idea here is that a lot of people say that, innovation is about failing fast. That's a crazy idea. Innovation is about learning and improving fast. And so what you want to use is the best ideas for improving fast, right? So you start off with the most fundamental questions, and you have to keep on showing up and iterating and learning from each other. It's all about learning from each other to be successful fast enough.
I have to get to this because you told the story, but while networking earlier, I know you had someone from India. I talked to someone from Brazil. Tell your story of your recent Indian workshop.
Well, by the way, it's an indication of what we can do now that we're online. Again, I think this is a transformational moment for innovation across America. It makes it possible for university people to work in a profoundly more efficient way. It allows the government to do that, and it certainly allows companies to do that. Well, who's going to take advantage of it? Well, so, I've always worked around the world, and one of my good Indian friends called up and said, Curt, would you want a workshop for some Indian entrepreneurs that I know? I'd love to. So we get together. It's 6 entrepreneurs spread all over India. They're all in different cities. They all have disabilities. One of the ladies was blind. It was all kinds of things. And one lady had limited mobility. She had only had 20% of her physical mobility left. And she gave a presentation on her bed, sideways, in bed, for her venture. And she was absolutely amazing. She was stunning how good she was and how smart she was. And her venture was to form clothing for people that have disabilities, clothing that would fit, that would be easy to put on, and that would be attractive. I'll tell you, it was a moving speech when she gave her value proposition. And we had them do it over and over. I had them do it 3 times. Each one of the teams gave it over. They learned from each other. They learned from me. We asked them questions from different perspectives. And it was amazing how much improvement we made in just 3 hours. And I got incredible emails after it. It was a profound experience for me, certainly, and I hope for them.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Let's shift gears a little bit. When we have a lot of people from industry and a lot of people from university,
Yep.
How can we make that interface work better?
Oh, so there's the other big reason. That's why most tech transfer programs fail, right? Is that, again, if you're a company, all you're interested in is value. And so the first question is, do you share a common language for value? And the answer is almost no. No. University professors do not speak the language of value. So again, what Todd and I are doing at WPI, we're giving everyone the fundamentals of a value proposition and then taking people farther than that. What that means is they can actually talk to a customer, a commercial customer, or a government grant. To anybody, you can talk to them better. But certainly for a company, if you can't talk to them in the language of value, you can't talk to them because they don't know what to do with you. So here's an amazing thing. So all these presentations I listen to all the time, what they sound like is this. The person will come in and say, Curt, do you have 3 hours? I want to tell you my brilliant idea. Do you have 3 hours? It's brilliant. The need is obvious. Don't worry about that. No one's ever done this before. I want you to listen to my idea. The benefits, they're astounding. Nobody's ever created this much value. And there's no competition. It's absolutely no one's ever thought of this before. This is it. This is the best thing in the world. Well, that's what most presentations sound like. I would say 99% of the presentations I hear for the first time sound like that. We call them big A's. They're all about the person's approach. They're in love with it. And my question when they walk in the door first is, have you identified an important unmet need? Let's start there. And do you understand the competition? And from that, we can have a discussion of, do you really have a big, important approach? So I know these things sound obvious to a lot of the people who listen to this, but you have to be sitting in these workshops that we run time and time again with leading companies around the world. And basically, they're all big A's. And once people understand that, and that's part of the language that we develop with them, then everybody begins to know, no, don't do that. No, that's not going to work. We're going to have to pivot if we take that approach, and it's going to be ugly. Don't pivot. Or pivot smart, I should say.
And so WPI, like many other schools attending tonight, have a i4i site program.
Yes.
Working on value proposition and customer discovery.
Great.
And can you explain the difference between what you're talking about with value creation versus the business model canvas?
So the business model canvas, that's more of an entrepreneurial approach. So that's it. That's the end of the process. So we start at the beginning of the process and then we work up to i4i. So we're the natural complement to i4i. Anybody who's been through our material, I mean, we'll take you through all the i4i stuff too with our methodology. We do that, right? But if you've been through what we teach and the fundamentals that we teach, when you get into an i4i program, you're going to be in really good shape. So it's a good program. It's just not the itch that needs to be scratched in most of the organizations we see. When I say that most of the presentations we see are big A's, that's still people who've been through Lean and Agile and i4i and all those programs. They still have not mastered, in most cases, the fundamentals of value creation. And so they struggle. They struggle. But I think the best thing you can do is to have both of those programs. First, you have a value creation program to make sure the fundamentals are in place. And then you have an entrepreneurial program where people can go and learn all the other stuff they need to know.
So we have someone else in the chat here. and I'll push back a little bit, but technology transfer is currently, unfortunately, a one-way street. The university tries to sell to industry, period. Why can't industry and university partner to create something together for the benefit of all? And yeah, I mean, I say I have two customers. I have my professor as a customer, and when I'm licensing versus a startup, the company is my customer. And I am a salesperson. It drives my colleagues crazy because I think they want to be a lofty title, and now we're salespeople. But at WPI, and I shouldn't be doing the talking here, but maybe you could describe the Mqp process at WPI and the number of company interfaces that we do working together to benefit all.
Well, so just on the bigger issue of that question, Todd, is the main reason that universities and industry have a hard time working together is they don't share that common language and those common values of creating value. Until you understand those things, it's almost impossible. You know, how many review panels have I been on with NSF programs and others where you get all the folks together and you walk around to the corporate guys and you say, why are you here? They say, well, you know, we have a great party every year and we get to see students that we want to hire. Are you really interested in the research? Well, something might happen, so that's a benefit too. But because they can't speak to each other properly, they can't work together. When we did Siri, we actually, if you count up all the partners we had over the time we developed it, we had about 30 partners. And because we could speak to the basic researchers, we could speak to the academics, we could speak to the companies. And so we were able actually to bring everybody together to solve that problem. By the way, we beat IBM by 7 years. This is crazy, right? Why? Because we actually could collaborate. We could collaborate really efficiently, and those big companies basically don't, because they set up barriers and they don't have a common language and framework. So at WPI, yes, we're a project-based university. We pioneered project-based education. And we send teams out to work with companies, and we put them through the rudiments of these kinds of ideas before they go out, so they're better positioned when they go out, and that they know more about, you know, kind of the mental framework of people in the company. So Todd and I are working on how can we even enhance that even more now that we're again online. That opens up a whole new world of possibilities to work with companies. Just for example, imagine you have a student, they're going to work with a company. We can now hold an hour-and-a-half workshop with the company and with the students on value creation. So we both can be working together on the problem we want to talk about while we learn these fundamentals of value creation. That's a home run for everybody. That's a big home run. And again, because we're online, it's easy to do. It's a home run.
Yeah, I'm amazed of the students coming into my office with their intellectual property. And I knew one went through you and your partner Len's process, and they came in with their value proposition, and they did the NABC was done perfectly. And I said, "Were you through?"
Well, so here's the funny thing. Like with most things, you know, when we do this with the students, and by the way, that's the other thing we're doing at WPI. We're now adding value creation to the student team projects. We're aspiring to be the first university in the world that gives a world-class STEM education, sending the kids globally to work to understand what it's like to work in a global economy, team-based project solving to learn the fundamentals of collaboration and those sorts of things, but also to add value creation. Value creation is the job of all professionals. Every professional has the responsibility to create value, but how many professionals actually know how to do that? Again, having worked, you know, doing this for all this time in hundreds and hundreds of companies, almost none. They have to learn it the hard way, which is how I learned it. And that is a painful way to do it. So at WPI, we want to integrate value creation into the entire program at the university with the researchers, with the students, with programs like Todd, great people like Todd, where we can integrate these things into the fabric so that everybody's thinking about how do we solve problems in a way that matters to people. I mean, isn't that our job? Isn't our job to not just solve problems? We're not just want to do student projects. That's not the goal. The goal is to do student projects that matter. And that means you're a value creator. And if you know how to do that, it's a lifelong skill. It's the most valuable skill you can have as a professional because it's the only skill that becomes more valuable over your career. It's the ticket to lifelong employment.
So Vineet is reading my mind because I was going to ask, about your efforts at Northeastern, but he added in, so, how do you see the difference in faculty around research commercialization at WPI and Northeastern compared to Stanford?
Faculty pretty much are all the same. So they're always suspicious of this to begin with because they want to be left alone, and for really good reasons, because most of the things they've been subjected to are not efficient and not effective, and they don't respect their time and their responsibilities. So we've done this all over the world with universities and with companies, Sweden, Finland, Japan, China, you name it. We've done this, and they all start out pretty much the same. But if you do it and you see how much it will improve the efficiency and effectiveness of your work, then it tends to stick. But you have to get people over that. I don't see. By the way, again, it's never about the people, the opportunities, or the money. It's all about the way they work together and how terrible it is today.
So, drilling a little more, are you doing something different at Northeastern because they're much different? With 11 campuses or whatever number of campuses around the world now and so forth.
Yes. Well, the one thing we're doing, so we're teaching the faculty. We're doing the same thing there. We're not teaching students. That's the big difference between Northeastern and WPI. WPI, after all, is a project-based university, so we can do it. If you're not a project-based university the way we are, it's a little harder. But the big thing we're doing at Northeastern is we are creating an online version of our program so it can scale at low cost. We want the kinds of ideas we're talking about tonight to reach the world, basically. And the only way to do that is it has to be online, and it has to, so it scales at low cost. So right now, if you're interested in what I'm talking about on Coursera, if you type in Coursera, Carlson and Innovation, you'll end up at an online version of our introduction to what we teach around the world. It's free, so you can just do it. But that's not what we're after. Innovation is experiential. That is, you have to do it and do it and do it. Coursera is not an effective way to teach. So that's not our goal. Our goal, we did that to learn and to have a taster for people. But the platform we'll have out probably the middle of this year is truly online, and it's truly interactive. It's hard to do. Doing interactive online is hard to do. Northeastern knows how to do that, which is why we're working at Northeastern. I think that might be the most important thing I've ever done in my career. It swamps Siri, high definition television, and Tudor surgical. It's not even close. If we can improve the way people do innovation, that is the innovation of all innovations.
So we only have a few minutes left, and I'm dying to have you explain about the quartet and how value creation impacts the quartet.
Well, as I mentioned, I was a professional violinist as a kid, and fortunately, I decided not to do that. But I got to play chamber music. Now, if you've played music seriously or sports, any serious team activity, you discover certain things that are really profound. The power of sharing a vision on something you all agree is important, developing a shared language so you can communicate effectively, having everybody have a unique role. When you do something like that and it all comes together after practicing, for weeks or months or years, it's like magic. It just feels tremendous. So that was that was my first introduction to basically team-based kind of collaboration like this. And it became my metaphor for how to do value creation. So that led to my study of what's called active learning. And it turns out that active learning is the science of how people learn and improve the best. And it turns out that music, surprise, surprise, given the fact it's been around so long, has discovered how to do that. So that was my metaphor and the basis for the methodology we now teach. It's the only methodology in the world right now that's based 100% on active learning principles. And I think it's one reason why it's so effective. It's not that complicated, it's fundamental, and it goes right down the line. If somebody's interested in this, they can send me an email. I'll be happy to discuss it with you. It's a really big idea. It's a really big idea for education. And it's why, by the way, at Northeastern, we insisted that our program be experiential, because if it's not experiential, it's not active learning, it's not real learning. It doesn't work.
So
probably more than you wanted to know, Todd.
No, that's great. Go to Curt's website and read the whole article.
Yeah, by the way, on Coursera I'm on LinkedIn if you're interested for more. I do YouTube videos. I got a whole bunch of them up. And please respond, ask questions. If you think I'm messing up something, please let me know. It'd be wonderful to have a discussion with you.
So one last quick one is, how does industry effectively approach academia to understand issues that we are trying to solve through innovation? So flipping it around, how does industry, get academia engaged?
Well, again, you have to line up on a big important problem and go through the kinds of things we're talking about, Todd. I would tell you at SRI, one of the most effective things we did to integrate university and our researchers and companies was, in fact, to run one of these kinds of value creation forums that we go through. We would teach everybody, we give everybody some of these skills, and then we would start developing value propositions on things that could be valuable for everybody. That is a really powerful thing. Again, it solves the basic problem of tech transfer. That word again, just so everybody knows. That kind of interaction focused on solving a real problem is what's missing. If that is not there, it can't work. I mean, just forget about it. It's not going to work. If you're not working together collaboratively over an extended period of time to develop a real value proposition, it basically, I mean, you can get lucky, 1 in 1,000 times, but systematically you will not be successful.
Well, we're out of time. I just want to be the first to say thank you very much for taking the time and in the middle of your afternoon to share your thoughts with us. I find that, especially this approach of researchers using value creation to get grants, that's totally new to me, and it's having an impact at WPI. So I want to thank you.
It's